Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me today. We continue our discussion on OAuth 2, but today we discuss about multi-tenancy. We have already covered all the essential actors in the OAuth 2 framework. And we discussed, of course, we started with the authorization server, we discussed the resource server, we discussed even the client, and you have seen in the previous lesson that it's not only web applications and mobile applications who can act as clients, but you can have even services as well acting as clients, and we have learned how to implement that. And today we will be working on having multiple authorization servers, which is actually also called multi-tenancy. Thank you very much for being here with me today again, and of course I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget that if you are watching the event live, you have a live chat there, so you can leave your discussions and questions in the live chat. And if you are watching the event recorded, you can still ask me questions in the comment section, start discussions, and find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Let me start by sharing my screen and discuss again on the diagram. So these are the three actors that we have discussed. Of course, we also have the user, which is not covered by my diagram. We don't need the user for the current discussion. And what we discussed today is what happens if you want to have multiple authorization servers. So when can something like this happen? You know already that the client uses the authorization server to get tokens, and it further uses tokens to get authorized for resources on the resource server. So you get a token like that, and then the client sends the token and gets authorized against its backend. We have seen that you can have opaque tokens and non-opaque tokens, and depending on the kind of token you use, you might have a cryptographic way to manage the token, and the resource server has a cryptographic way to manage the token and see if it's a valid one, or if it's a non-opaque, it usually, the other way, if it's a non-opaque, it is cryptographic. If it's an opaque one, it uses introspection, which means that it has to call an endpoint on the authorization server, sends the token, and finds back the details and if the token is a valid one or not. Now, this was hopefully pretty simple until now, when we only have an authorization server, but as some of you already spotted out and asked me in the previous weeks, there are situations in the real world where you might have the need of having multiple authorization servers. So imagine that you want to implement a website and you want to allow your user to log in with both or all Facebook, LinkedIn, and GitHub, for example. So you have one of the possibilities you will allow is your user to use its Facebook account. The other possibility is they can use their GitHub account, and another possibility is that they need to use their LinkedIn account, and you can have as many as possible. Usually when you discuss an organization infrastructure, this is not very common, because you usually in your organization you only have one authorization server. Is the place where the users are managed and the details about them, and all the applications, meaning all the resource servers of that company, use the only one authorization server. But in some applications where you want to allow your users, your users are public users, and you want to allow them log in with their own credentials, then it can be common that you want to allow your user to log in using various ways. So you will not have only one place, only one system that knows the users, because some users don't have a Facebook account, but you still want to allow them, for example, log in with a different solution like GitHub. Other users don't have a GitHub account, but prefer to log in using some social network like LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. So you want to give them this possibility. So how? It's pretty simple from a design point of view. If you look at the diagram, from the top of the mountain is not that difficult. Now you have more places where we have users. The framework will work in the same way. You still have your client getting a token from an authorization server. You still have the resource server validating that token in a way or another, and then use the information provided through that token or from an introspection endpoint to implement the authorization configuration. But the problem is, I have multiple problems actually. One of them is that the client will redirect the user to one of these. That's kind of easy. Okay, it's on the client side. It's not part of our security implementation. The first thing is to just remember as a developer that the client, whatever that is, a mobile application or a web one, will have to redirect the user to the right authorization server. Then, depending on the authorization server, of course, they still keep the same idea. The user logs in, assuming we continue using the authorization code grant type, which we know already is the most common one when dealing with a user now. And it comes back with a token. The token can be different. And I think that the first impediment we might have is the fact that the token is different. The fact that the token is different, however, has two different possibilities. Either all the tokens will be non-opaque ones, so JVT ones, and in that case you already know how to manage custom claims, because we have discussed that at a certain point in the past. Or some of them might be opaque and some of them might be non-opaque, and in that case we will have an issue on the resource server side, because you know that depending on the kind of the token, you use a different way to verify the token and get the information. If it is a non-opaque token, so meaning you have the data inside, like in the case of the JVT token, then you will verify the signature and you will get the data from the claims directly. If it is an opaque token, then as you know, you have to have your resource server calling an introspection endpoint, and then the introspection endpoint needs to be the right one, because assuming let's assume that we have one or more of these using opaque tokens, then of course one of them will have this introspection endpoint, the other one will have another introspection endpoint, and of course both the absolute URL and the path may be different. The absolute URL will be definitely different. The path can also be different, so they are totally different URIs, in other words. So you need to make sure that the resource server really calls the appropriate endpoint. So I will not be able to demonstrate absolutely all the possibilities in this video, and that's not my point. I would like to make you aware about the contracts you need to use on the resource server side to make something like this happen, and prove the way you can implement this for the most common case, which is the case where you have one or more, two or more authorization servers using JWTs, and that hopefully should cover everything you need to put the pieces together and implement any other thing that you might need in a real world example where you have to implement something. Okay, so let's figure out how can we do that. Well, of course, if we want to prove that something like this really works, we will need to start a couple of authorization servers ourselves. So that's what we are going to do. I'm going to actually do something like this. I'm here in my folder where I keep all my projects for all my streams on YouTube. And if I correctly remember, it was this 13th one that we have continuously used as our authorization server. Did we? I think we did. Yeah, this is the authorization server. So what I'm going to do, because I might end up having different things that I change in it, I'm gonna copy it twice. So this one will be I will rename it to 17 E11, and then I'm going to copy it again, and this will be our second authorization server in case we want to change things, because they are different applications, aren't they? So I don't want to simply just start the same server again. I will probably end up doing that, but I want to have the flexibility today, and maybe in the next lessons, to change this if I need to prove different things. So let's actually make them two different applications like they would be in a real world application. Okay, so I'm just going to reuse the code because I don't want to like spend a lot of time just recreating things that you already know, but I'm gonna copy it twice and make sure that we really have two different authorization servers in the end. And now I'm gonna basically make sure I open those. So this is the first. Yes, trust the projects. I'm gonna close this one because I don't need it anymore. And then I'm gonna open the second as well. Here it is. So now we have two authorization servers. The only change for the moment I'd really like to make is make sure that we can start both. So I just need to make sure one of them will start on a different port than 8080. So let's say server port, IntelliJ is still resolving dependencies. Server port will be 7070, for example, for this one. Let's also make sure that we allow our IDE to resolve the dependencies, and then hopefully I will be able to start both of them. That's what I want to end up being able to do. And once I've started them up, I of course for the moment have two identical authorization servers but in two separate projects, and we can use this example as for today to demonstrate the configuration of the resource server. So I'll have to create actually a third project which will be the resource server. Okay, so hopefully I will be able at least to start the applications now. So I'm starting the first one, and then I'm starting the second one, and then I create the resource server. And in the resource server, I will demonstrate how to use both of them, one or another. So I'm not sure why it actually takes so long start. I will give it some time. So okay, starting application finally. Okay, if I correctly remember, I didn't restart my computer since a long time, so my database should still be up and running. So it's the same one, of course, that we have already used in lesson 13, because that's what we did. We actually copied that project, didn't we? So in case you need a refresher on that, you can always go back to lesson 13 and see what we did there. This is the first server. This is the second one I'm going to start now. And then create a new project for my resource server. So I did briefly explain what multi-tenancy is, didn't I? So I started from the discussion with this diagram about multi-tenancy, and I have explained that is, in a couple of words to recap, the idea of having multiple authorization servers. Probably you have missed the beginning of the lesson, and that's why you are asking this, but you can anytime go back in the stream to the beginning of the lesson and see the video full from the very beginning. Still, and new project. Okay, how do we call this one? Spring Security. It's still just to avoid confusion right here, 2022, lesson 17. E1, and then I will name it RS from resource server to be easier to identify you guys when you will find it later on my GitHub account. It is a web application because it's the simplest to demonstrate. We have security. Someone told me that if you add the OAuth resource server, it comes with Spring Security. Didn't check that, so let me actually add both of them to make sure, and then create the project. And I will definitely start by adding a very simple endpoint that I will use as my resource, a secured resource I want to use to demonstrate the applicability. So okay, I go back to my Postman. I would like to check actually that I really, my authorization servers really work fine. So if I'm going here and say one localhost 8080 and the second one should be 7070. Okay, both of them seem to work correctly. You will see that the issuer is basically the most important thing. So the issuer is basically what we need. I will use this very soon. So, okay, let's start by creating a controller. Okay, REST controller. A very simple endpoint for our demonstration. And of course the configuration class. So project config. And as we already know, we have to use the security filter chain. We are using Spring Boot 3, so that means we can't extend the web security configure adapter anymore. We create a bin in the context, HTTP security, and we call the build method to build the chain that we return, and of course we have to throw the exception. And that's the first point. So if you'd have to configure now OAuth resource server, you know that you have the possibility to either use JVT or opaque token. If I use either of those, I should actually have an exception, and I can try this just to prove that if I don't configure either JVT or opaque, then the application shouldn't be able to start. Then I should have changed the port also, because port 8080 is already used by one of my authorization servers. So now it will fail because of the port, but it will anyway fail because I don't have a proper configuration here. So up to the point where it's building, when you have multiple authorization server clients, would need to exist that many times? No, I mean, it's irrelevant, isn't it? Because you can have one client and you will log in with one or the other, so it doesn't really make any difference on how many clients you have. You have one client and give it the possibility to log in with one or the other. So of course, the instance of clients, they might be hundreds, thousands. When you have an application, you have a mobile application, you might have a lot of users, but that each one of your client will be able to log in with one or the other. Okay. So is it failing? Yeah, it's failing. Of course, it's failing because of port 8080, which is in use. So let's change this to server port 9090. So now we still shouldn't be able to start our application because it will fail. We will fail because of my poor configuration. We should be able to tell me, Spring Boot should be able to tell me that I should either have a JVT or opaque specified here. So it can't be on any of the other possibilities. Have I thought about using dark mode? Yes, dark mode is actually an anti-pattern for presentations, Christian, so I'm not going to use it. That's why I'm using white, my white screen, my normal white screen. Cool. Now it started. I'm surprised it's actually not failing. I would have expected it to fail. But anyway, let's just assume that anyway it's not working, because you can't simply just have an OAuth 2 resource server and not specify the way you will validate the tokens. So it's still not right. Okay, so what should we do in that case? Well, you either use JVT or opaque, but you already know how to do that. But in this case, that would not be enough, because, well, if I will use JVT, for example, then I can specify keyset URI, and I can specify an authentication converter, but that's the only thing I can do for only one authorization server, where in my case I have multiple authorization servers. So what I'm going to do is actually, instead of that, use an authentication manager resolver. So that's the point with having the deep customization of the resource server starts from an authentication manager resolver. And this authentication manager resolver basically is an object that can manage multiple authentication providers, and each authentication provider, now going back to the first lessons of this playlist, it's a way to implement the authentication. Fortunately for us, in most situations, we can still not have to go very deep into the configuration itself. So we will be able to configure our resource server with predefined authentication managers. But in case we really want to go very deep into the customization, we can go as deep as creating our own authentication providers for the management of specific communication with one authorization server or another. So let's actually create bin of type authentication manager resolver, and this one will be of type HTTP servlet request, because based on the request, you know to which authorization server you'd have to go. So it's in the request where you have the information. So that's why the generic type it uses is based on the HTTP request itself. Now, if you take a look inside this interface, you will see it's a very simple interface that returns an authentication manager based on the request in our case, because the request is what we used as as a resource server. So what you need to do here is to basically return an authentication manager. So I should be able to write something like authentication manager, and then use an implementation of the authentication manager, such as authentication provider manager, for example. And then you have the authentication provider as a parameter, so you can use something like JVT authentication provider or something else. Okay, and then you can return just a simple implementation from the HTTP request. You return the authentication managers. That's a Lambda implementation of the authentication manager resolver. And of course, here you would provide the decoder. The decoder can be even, in my case, injected, something like this. Okay, that doesn't solve our problem with the multi-tenancy. It's just a way to simply show you how this bin works. Because in the end, then you will just provide it somehow here. Okay, which will not work with my JVT decoder here anyway. I would have to basically instantiate here, instantiate somehow here. But again, it's irrelevant. The idea is that in the end, the authentication manager resolver is what allows you to have one or more providers and then implement them based on the specific logic you want. If you have multiple authorization servers and they all use non-opaque tokens, then it's a little bit more easy because you have implementations of this interface that allow you work with JVTs, and the first one on the list here is actually the implementation that I was looking for, the JVT Issuer Authentication Manager Resolver. As the name suggests, it's an implementation of the Authentication Manager Resolver interface that allows you to easily deal with the situation where you have multiple authorization servers that issue JVTs. So let's start with this solution and try to implement it and prove it works. Okay, so this is, as you can see, it's basically an implementation of the contract that Spring Security knows and will allow us deal easily with that. So I'm just going to write something like this. Okay, I need to import it as well. I need to create an instance out of it, and then I will simply just return that instance. And the JVT Issuer Authentication Manager is created in a such simple way in which it simply takes the URIs of the issuers. So that means the only thing I need to do is go to the configuration, and for my both authorization server I will take the issuer. By default is the URL, but remember that you can customize it in the authorization server if you use the authorization server settings bin. So just to be sure, make sure that when you use the issuer, you get the right address, otherwise it will not work. So resource server, here it is. I'm going back here, and then one of them. And then of course you will trust me that the second one is the same, but the port is 8080. And that's basically it. So if you have nothing special than just JVTs, this should actually work. So I'm going to start the application and try to test it with you together. And that means I need a browser. The browser, and I need to go here, and I will use the same way. I will simply copy the authorization and the token link to get the authorization code and then the token, like we did in the previous lessons, and then we call from post1 the resource, the demo resource. So here it is. If I remember correctly, in the database it was something like bland12345. I get the code, I take the code, I'm going to post, and I'm going to make sure, so I used 8080, so now I'm on the first authorization server, which means that the only thing I need to do is copy the code, and then I should get a token. Here it is. And you can first of all prove that the token is what we wanted. So JVT.io. Come on. Oh. Not sure what happens here. Okay, JVT.io doesn't want to work, but you can trust me until it loads that the token we got is the one from issuer 8080. I should be able to put it here and see the issuer on the right side. Fine enough, but we can't, so we can go to our next step and add a separate tab here. And it was HTTP localhost 9090 demo, and then in the authorization server, in the authorization header, bearer and the token, and I call it like the 401. Wow, that's funny. So I have to try again, maybe it is something wrong. Authorization headers demo. We'll check again. Demo. Okay. So let's check the token again, just to make sure. So the issuer is correct. Okay, fine enough. I will just try it again. I will give it another try. Maybe I did something wrong. Authorization server. So I'm gonna maybe it's good if I give a restart the applications. Okay. I'm gonna try again. So 8080, which is this one. Okay, here it is. Build 1 2 3 4 5, sign in, give me the authorization code, take the authorization code, and go back to Postman, put the code here, send the code, take the token, and then put it again in Postman, get 9090 demo bearer token. Don't know what happens. I'm pretty sure I'm doing something wrong, but I will check. Anyway, let's try with the second one. If that one is still not working, I'm going to check the code. So that would mean going to, which one was it? 7070, and try with that one as well. So maybe it's something with the way I configured it. So browser, No, my fault. It should be 7070. Still bill and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, since this time they are going to the same database, so it should work. And then 7070, and then the code should issue me a token that is slightly different. Slightly different, meaning no, still no. So it's something that I wrongly implemented, but I will check it immediately why. But this should be at least check that this has the right issuer. So the issuer is 7070 in this case. Now I'm going back a little bit. So what could I have done wrong? So I did set it this way, and I have a bean of the right type. Maybe I didn't. Did I make the mistake of not restarting the resource server after I changed this? Could I have done this? Well, it's possible, isn't it? Okay, just to make sure. Okay, just to make sure I didn't do that mistake. No, still not. Well, that's very funny, because I really don't know what I mean, the configuration should be pretty straightforward, isn't it? Trusted issuers, localhost 7070, 8080. I generated it, I would say, the right way, and it still doesn't work. Okay, we can try to see what the heck is not right here, but it's very strange, isn't it? Okay, we can start from here. Okay. Okay. Okay, I generated a new token just to be sure I have a fresh one, and then I added a breakpoint, which hopefully will clarify what is wrong with my implementation. Let's do something like this and send it. Oh, it doesn't even go into that. Okay. So I start to adapt my abilities of configuring Spring Security. What could I have done wrongly? Configuration, bin, it's on its place. Everything is fine here. Okay. Okay, very strange. That's a really strange result. It doesn't even go into my configuration. That's the problem, but why? Bin it's on its place, so she starts, but it doesn't create the bins. Wow. Is there something wrong with my target folder or something? Okay, anyway, so guys, you will trust me that normally this configuration should work, but simply my Spring Boot project doesn't create the bins for some reason, and I have no idea why. So I added a breakpoint in the bin. Okay, I have a question meanwhile. So GWKs, does the result automatically fetch the keys? Yes, normally it fetches the keys because it has the issuer. But the problem here is it's not that it doesn't fetch the keys or something, it's just my project doesn't create the bins at all. Like I added a breakpoint here, I'm on debug mode, and simply when I restart, it should go on the breakpoint and create the bin, but it doesn't create the bin at all. So that's kind of the problem that I have here, which is looks like something is wrong with, I don't know, maybe the project, or but this is a newly created one, so I'm not sure exactly what could have gone wrong with it. Or maybe my IntelliJ has some specific problem. I could simply try, just as an idea, to recreate the project completely. So say something like 2022 C17 E2 RS, just to see if it's my my fault or something, and they say next web security and resource server, and I shouldn't miss anything for this simple example. There is a problem in Spring Boot 3.03. Can it be? Can it be such a problem in Spring 3.03? I'm not sure. Yeah, it can be. I mean, I probably didn't use it until now, and now it's happening. But let me try once more, because I'm pretty sure I didn't do anything wrong. Of course, they all say that. I never did something wrong. I never did. But it can either be that I did something really wrong and my bins are not created, or it can be that that's my problem. Okay, let me put it here. So I'm gonna completely paste this. And then I have project config class. And I will just take them, and then the last thing that I will try is downgrade to a different Spring Boot version, but I pretty much doubt that's the problem. It can't be that. It really can't be that. Okay. Oh shit. Config folder. Okay, have we really managed to find such an issue in 303? Sounds very, very unlikely to me. I've never found such an issue. Okay, server started because of... And then... do that again. And then... still no. Wow. Okay, last try. And then I will have to come back with a solution because I really don't know what happens if this one doesn't work. So you say it might be a Spring Boot problem. I made the downgrade. I really doubt this is the problem, but who knows. Wow, it works. Incredible. So it really is a problem with 303. That's fantastic. I wouldn't believe that. Honestly, I wouldn't believe it's a problem with the version. Really. So yeah, of course, I did everything right from the beginning. It really seems to be a bug with Spring Boot. You're very good, guys. So you're really good. So it is indeed a bug with Spring Boot. It's not a problem with my configuration, okay? I will unfortunately not be able to show any more things today because we lost a lot of time debugging this. But yeah, that's wow. So yeah, to recap, because again, I will not be able to cover more. What we managed to do today is to have 2 authorization servers and one resource server working with both of them. So indeed, it seems for the moment, if you want to try it, and it looks to be more of a problem of creating the beans, at least on my computer, so not related just to this example. You might face other problems as well, but the idea is that in our case, of course, being that it didn't create the beans, then you of course didn't have the configuration also created in the application. So with that version being downgraded, it seems now that it creates correctly the beans, and we basically managed to go deeper into customizing the resource server to create the logic that we wanted. And we used an out-of-the-box implementation of the authentication manager resolver. And maybe that's something I will show you in the next lesson. You could have, I will comment this out just as an idea. You could have had instead your own implementation. So you just can implement based on the HTTP request or from request, and you return an authentication manager, and you can have your own logic on how this works here, depending on how you want to redirect your request. And that's something, for example, that you do when you have opaque versus non-opaque tokens, when you have authorization servers that use both opaque and non-opaque. And then of course you have here the authentication manager. You create it, this is A1 for example, and you create it, new provider manager, and then you have the authentication provider here implementation. So you can customize the authentication provider and have then a custom authentication manager resolver, and that way you can basically like literally customize the very small tiny things. Yeah, but at least we managed to make it work, because I was starting to believe that I'm crazy. I'm not crazy. The code was correct and it works. So it's still the way I knew it, and that's of course the simplest implementation where you have multiple authorization servers, all of them working with JWT. Because if there aren't all of them working with JWT, this one will not work anymore. Of course, this is a resolver strictly for the situation where all of them work on JWT, and then you simply give them the issuer locations, and being that they have the issuer location, then they can get also the keys, because the keys are the key URI is provided by the application, by the authorization server application, of course. So yeah, that's how it works. Okay, I'm still a little bit in shock to see that we have such a problem with Spring Boot 3.0.3, but probably it will get solved as soon as possible. Let me see if you still have questions, and I promise to continue with this and hopefully with less issues in the next lesson. So yes, indeed, it was a problem with Spring Boot. The configuration, I think you have already seen it, so it's not a big deal. The heart of the implementation is this bin, where you can customize based on the request. Okay, the manager is always based on the request. Here is the request, the manager that you want. And is it a good bad practice to have one authorization server and have the authorization server be a client to Google, Facebook? I'm not sure if I understand the question. If you have if you have a client for Google, Facebook, and so on, you automatically have more authorization servers. So you cannot have one authorization server but also have multiple logins. Something is not, I can't really understand the question. So maybe we should go back to our diagram to recap. So itself, LinkedIn is an authorization server, GitHub is another authorization, Facebook is another authorization server. So you automatically are in the multi-tenancy when you have this situation, meaning that you have more authorization servers, one resource server. If you can have one resource server and multiple authorization servers, yes, this is called multi-tenancy. Yes, it's a good practice. It's something that we need sometimes in real world. And something that I skipped, and it was on my plan to tell this to you today, is that you have to be very careful, because each of these might have their own way to represent the user. So that means that you might need to find a unique identifier if you want to consider the situation where the same account can be recognized by logging in with either of these. But if you don't do that, then you would have different users as being recognized depending on how your user will log in using either of your authorization servers. So if the authorization server is the one redirecting to Google, well, in that case, I'm still not sure, because if you are redirecting to Google, you still have Google, so still Google is your authorization server. You want your application to have like kind of a server in front, like Keycloak, and then use that. Yes, probably you can. Now, it doesn't change a lot of things if you have that. If you have something like this one redirecting to this and that, that's fine enough. Honestly, I wouldn't see why you do that. Maybe you would do that because you want to have some implementation here as well. Does it still apply to the same principle? Yes. Is it a good practice? I'm not sure, depending on exactly what you do. It's possible to implement something like this. Yes, it's possible. But if it is or not a good practice, that's more of an architectural question rather than an implementation one, and it really depends on the system. I hope that answers your question, Gianluca. Password grant type is deprecated. You don't use it anymore, so because of that, I can't show you how to do that. Actually, if you go to the authorization server itself, you will see that it's deprecated. So I think it should be straight out. try to find it. So no, don't use the password grant type anymore. You should not do that. It's still here, but you can clearly see it being marked as deprecated. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. I think it's time to close it for today. I had to spend some time on debugging that problem with Spring Boot, but again, the code is fine. It's not because of the code. You can still take it as the good one. We will see what happened exactly with Spring Boot, and in the next lesson I will take this into more details. Until then, thank you very much, everyone, for being here with me and for being active and asking questions. I'm waving goodbye, and I'm wishing you an excellent time for study further.